Hello, my name is Lee Cooper, and this is my Module 12 Tort Liability for EDL 850 School Law. So what is tort liability? Well, it is any kind of civil wrong from what I understand. This civil wrong could be intentional, or unintentional, or negligence. So intentional, things like assault, battery, false imprisonment, defamation, mental distress, trespassing on personal property. So things that are, again, intentional and are a wrong against somebody, those ones being pretty obvious. The other being negligence. And in order to prove negligence, you have to have, sorry, that's my dog, standard of care, breach of duty, proximity or legal cause and injury. So standard of care being that as an educator, you have to provide some type of standard of care. You are acting as if you are the parent in that situation. You are making sure that you're taking care of those children. Breach of duty is saying that you're not doing that. You are breaching that duty. Proximity or legal cause, so that's saying the thing that happened, the event that occurred, is because of something that you did or did not do. It's linked to the actual, say, teacher or administrator. And lastly, there has to be some type of injury that actually occurred. All right, so some cases. I chose this one. It didn't actually end up becoming a case, but I did want to choose it because it was something that happened at my network of schools. So there was an explosion at the high school. It was a first-year chemistry teacher, and he was untrained. So I do work for a network of charter schools, and the network of charter schools does not require that teachers who are coming in have to have a teacher's license or have to have any kind of teaching experience. That being said, this has caused some issues with inexperienced teachers. So a chemistry teacher had come in, was hired, it was at the beginning of the year, and he was showing, I think it was methanol, and he was showing like, hey, like it on fire. He went to go add more ethanol onto the fire. The fire went into the bottle and sprayed flame at a student. It injured 4 students, and 1 student went to the ER, as well as had to be in intensive care. So, again, this actually, nothing ended up happening from this as far as a court case or people being sued and those kinds of things. The teacher was looking at being charged with assault, but apparently it was dismissed. I honestly don't know why, especially considering some of the cases that I saw. This seems to be pretty clear that this would be an issue. Anyway, I just wanted to put it in though because it happened in my network. Now, some reactive measures. So what can you do to try to prevent something like this? Or sorry, what would I do in this situation? So reactive, sorry. So reactive measure, it would definitely be, right, like the removal of that teacher. Obviously, the teacher was not like trained and not competent enough to be able to deal with like such a situation where he's working with those chemistry and in those dangerous situations. So absolutely, that would be like, a firing of that teacher. The other reactive measure, and this is something that the school did, is sent out like a clear, hey, this is what happened, and to parents and those kinds of things to make sure that everybody knew what was going on. They closed down the labs for the time being to make sure like what had happened, why did it happen, and then from there tried to figure out some proactive measures. So proactive measures are going to be like you have to make sure that if a teacher is going to do any kind of experiments or anything like that, like those need to be pre-approved by an administrator. So that would be definitely a reactive measure. Now you still want teachers to have like freedom to do their teaching and stuff, right? And you don't want to be too constraining. But when you're talking about having a fire in a classroom, you need to have, right, like proactive measures there. So you need to make sure that like those things are being done in the proper way and being done by somebody who is an actual expert in what they're doing and is following safety protocols. Obviously, that was not the case here, and that caused an issue. So benefits of professional ethics, again, I think the teacher probably was just trying to look cool and those kinds of things, but, not acting in a professional manner. So there would obviously be a benefit here in this situation that could have, had he kind of taken that approach of being professional, making sure that he's always doing the right thing and making sure that student safety is coming first, right? Like this could have gone a long way to prevent this situation. All right, next one. Assault, standing for the pledge. Again, this is something that is still ongoing. There's not an actual case to cite here, but I wanted to put it in because it happened in Colorado, where I'm from, and where I'm currently teaching. So in Lafayette, Colorado, a teacher, Karen Smith, had forced a student to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. So from what I read, essentially they were doing the Pledge of Allegiance. The student refused to stand. The teacher pulled the student up by their jacket and then actually like removed him from the classroom. And that was the whole thing, right? Being forced to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, I happen to really like America, and I believe in standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, but I also know and also believe that you have, right, students do have a right to their freedom of expression, and they do not have to stand for the pledge or say the pledge. And actually, the school that I work at, we don't even say the pledge. So it's definitely not something that has to be done. So a reactive measure in this situation for this teacher, I think would be a dismissal of the teacher. And even though it may not have been an aggressive thing, there was no injury to the student from what I understand. They are trying to kind of call this assault, but I guess either way, yeah, I guess that would still be assault. Sorry, I'm thinking as far as negligence. But so reactive measures, I would say the removal of the teacher. Yeah, because obviously like the goal here is to keep students safe, and the goal is to make sure that students are learning, and them standing for the pledge does not meet either of those goals. Proactive measures, well, reactive and proactive, I would say if the school hasn't already, like making sure that teachers know what are the rights of students and understanding that like students do have rights. Students do have constitutional rights such as freedom of speech, such as freedom, of speech essentially, right, in this case. So teaching and understanding those rights and making sure that teachers know. Also, I guess, I just in any instance, right, it's always like there's that case that you don't want to kind of have any physical contact with students. Now, I mean, right, you're going to give like a student like a pat on the back or something like that, right? But I mean, like you got to be very cautious with that because of these situations. And obviously, pulling a student out of their seat is going to be an issue. So, right, like ensuring that your teachers know that. And again, you got to look at the teacher as an individual. So how does the benefits of professional ethics come involved here, right? Again, you're trying to look at this as the professional ethics of how are we serving students, and that's the goal, right? As the professional teacher, are you making sure that the student is safe, and are you making sure that the student is learning? Those are the goals, and the goal is not to assure that your student is standing for the pledge. Whether or not you are a believer in standing for the pledge, that doesn't matter in this case. It's still wrong in this case. All right, negligence. So I'm going to try to say this. I'm not sure I said that wrong. Versus Millard School District. So this was in a physical education class. A student died from a golf club accident. The teacher did not see it happen, and the student missed the first day on golf safety. So here's more of like an actual case, and what had happened is there was a day where they were inside because of inclement weather. They're learning golf. This was the second day they had done it. The student was asking friends like, hey, can you show me how to play, and those kinds of things. And he had not gotten any training on golfing. So that's kind of where they're saying that this is kind of like, linked to the teacher's actions, kind of going back to, right, like negligence, like what is actually causing that. So that proximity. And again, just to kind of go back, like how this was negligence, there was a standard of care that needed to be met that wasn't being met. The teachers were not watching. There was a breach of duty because obviously, with the teachers not watching, they were not teaching they didn't teach the student the safety. So that was like that breach of duty to where this incident was able to happen. There was proximity. So again, because the teachers were not watching and they did not provide proper training to the student who was absent. And then lastly, there was still an injury, right? Like it ended up causing the student to go unconscious, and then he never became conscious again. 2 days later, he actually died. So in this case, they did find that they were guilty of that. They were guilty of negligence and were charged for that. So this is a case that I think is really tricky. And these are things that can absolutely fall through the cracks. Like you have students that are absent and you're not going to necessarily be thinking about these things in the case. But I guess as far as like a reactive measure, as much as I don't actually agree with the outcome of this case, I think that the student was able to hold the golf club, those kinds of things, see the golf club, and was able to be around the situation. I don't think that they took the necessary care for themselves, right? They're obviously seeing other people swing it, those kinds of things, right? So I don't necessarily actually agree with the ruling of the case, but this is how the case was ruled, and if I were the principal in this situation, a reactive measure I mean, as far as like even just a public relations go, like you're going to need to let that teacher go, unfortunately. And you are going to need to obviously have like mental health supports for your students, and those kinds of things to where students can be able to handle the situation, because it is the death of another student, and that is something that is very serious. So you would have to take the reactive measures for that mental health prior to that. As far as proactive measures, I would just say that like any time that you're doing an activity, if you're even going from a day to day, I would say like even if every single student was there on the first day of safety, it is always good to go over the rules at least one more time, just to say like, hey, remember this is what's going on here. You need to be standing at this place, to just be very clear about what's going on. And I even little things like as far as things that aren't dangerous, right? I still find myself as a teacher going over those directions again. And especially when you're talking about things that could be dangerous, like you should be going over those directions. So making sure that your staff knows that, and especially like your physical education teacher knows that, hey, you need to make sure that anytime you do these things, you should give the directions more than once, and anytime you should give those directions before the activity, even if they've done it before. So benefits of professional ethics, I would just say it was, I believe it was actually a student teacher who was there when this happened, and the thing is that the teachers did not see, because they were working with individual students and they weren't looking at the whole class. From my understanding, there were 2 teachers in the vicinity, so I would just say, right, ensuring that you are having a communication, like, hey, can you keep it on the class? I'm going to talk to this one student. So, always keeping these things of safety in mind, having that kind of professional idea as you go into these. So how is it, and that could have been very helpful in this. All right. Next case is another case of negligence, Johnson Johnson versus the School District of Miller. So this is a elementary school teacher in a music class who is teaching London Bridge, and then they were doing an activity where students were learning about this London Bridge, and essentially it wasn't actually what's pictured here, but students were interlocking their arms and were swinging another student. Now, the teacher did say, right, we need to be safe. We're not supposed to be silly when we're doing this, and kind of went over some directions. However, as the first students who were doing this were doing the actual swinging, the teacher was not paying attention. The students swung the student too hard. They flew off into a bookshelf and had to get stitches. They cracked their head, had to get stitches, and was caused injury. So, in this case, again, it was an instance where they did find them guilty. They did have to pay those kinds of things for the damages and for future damages because of this incident. So, what happens when this happens in the class? What are the reactive measures that have to take place? I don't necessarily think that it would have to be a dismissal, but I would definitely say some type of formal reprimand and some type of formal disciplinary action on the teacher. I don't know if that necessarily means a dismissal, but right, the teacher should have definitely been watching as this happened. And again, as far as proactive measures go, anytime, right, these situations, it's all about how are we making sure that students are being safe? And if you're doing some kind of an activity that could possibly be dangerous, 1, you're going over those directions very carefully. 2, you are monitoring the situation very carefully. And you're keeping, right, that eagle eye on all of your students. So just making sure that teachers know that, they know that you need to have visual on all of your students, never turn your back to the class. Those are very important things to keep in mind. So as far as the benefits of professional ethics, what kind of professional ethics they could have had in this situation, again, making sure that they are being vigilant of their class and keeping an eye out the whole time. All right, last case. Frame versus Comey, and this is an acting substitute that forced a student out of a class, causing a fall to the student. The student fell, had injuries to themselves, and the case was actually dismissed. They were not charged. The substitute teacher was not charged. Okay. So in this situation, the student was actually being a disruptive student to the class, and that's why the teacher was having them removed. So as far as reactive measures, again, don't know if this is grounds for a dismissal, but definitely some type of a formal reprimand. At no point should you ever force a student to go somewhere, like pull them, anything like that. Like that is something that you should not do for instances like this, and because it is, right, can be considered assault, you shouldn't be, taking students and pushing them anywhere or pulling them anywhere that they, aren't going. If like a situation has to occur, right, like that should be done by somebody who is trained in those things, in like, what is the word I'm looking for? Constraining a student. Okay, so that would be your active measures. As far as proactive measures, again, understand, like making sure that teachers understand that unless you have some kind of like physical training to where like you have, you're kind of protecting yourself against that if a student does need to be forcibly removed from something because they are causing a safety situation or something like that's a different thing. But, right, like make sure that you're going through all of the everything that you can first, and making sure that like, is that student being a safety harm? And no, that the answer is no, then right, you shouldn't be touching that student. So making sure that staff are trained in that and knowing that's what needs to go down. And again, that's really kind of what's going down to this professional ethics. As a teacher, you should not be pulling students along like that, and you should be making sure that, right, you're keeping students safe and students are learning. Obviously, the student was being a distraction, so the students couldn't learn, and the student did need to leave that classroom. However, there were a lot more measures that could have taken place before the teacher was forcibly pushing that student out of the classroom, causing the fall. All right, that is what I have. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed. Here we go.